Good evening and welcome back. Tonight, we're opening the oldest storybook in the Western world, one filled with gods and monsters, heroes and riddles, love, war, and everything in between. This is Greek mythology, explained from beginning to end. We'll wander through Mount Olympus, the depths of the underworld, the edges of the earth and sea, and all the tangled myths that try to make sense of life, death, nature, and fate. As always, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it for you? Whether you're unwinding under a quiet sky or gently falling asleep, I hope this helps your thoughts drift a little softer tonight. This is a story shaped by firelight and memory, passed down for thousands of years, and tonight it's all yours. In the beginning, there was nothing. Not the kind of nothing that comes after something, not a quiet void or a dark sea waiting to be filled, but true absence. No earth, no sky, no time, no gods, no men, not even silence. This was chaos, the formless beginning, not a deity as later poets would personify, but a state of being that defied comprehension, a presence of absence that held in it the seed of everything. And out of this yawning chasm, stirred by forces unknowable and older than eternity, came the first stirrings of form. Gaia, the earth, was the first to emerge, not born of any womb, not shaped by hand or will, but simply appearing as foundation and mother, vast and steady and eternal. With her came Tartarus, the deep and dreadful pit beneath all things, and Eros, the binding force of attraction, who would later wear the guise of love, but in truth was something older and more ruthless, the pull that draws everything toward everything else. From them came Nyx, the endless night, and Erebus, the darkness that lingered at the edge of creation. The world had not yet begun, and already it was a place of mystery and shadow, a realm born not of reason, but of raw, unrelenting force. Gaia, vast and alone, gave birth to Uranus, the sky, her equal in majesty and scope, a dome of glittering stars cast above her soil. He was not shaped with arms or voice, but he was power and presence, and together, earth and sky became the first parents. Uranus lay over Gaia, cloaking her, pressing against her, an intimacy without tenderness. Their union produced strange and terrible children, beings of unrefined power and elemental violence. The first were the Titans, 12 in number, immense and radiant, each embodying some great force of nature or fate. Then came the Cyclopes, giants with a single blazing eye set in the middle of their brows, smiths of thunder and fire, and lastly, the Hecatonchires, beings of such unspeakable strength, they were born with 100 arms and 50 heads each, monstrous and wild, their very existence an insult to harmony. Uranus beheld these children with loathing. They were too strong, too strange, too full of potential, and he feared them, feared the power they carried, the chaos they might unleash, the future they could shape without him. In his dread, he did what all tyrants do when they cannot destroy what they fear. He hid it away. He thrust the Cyclops and Hecatonchires deep into Gaia's belly, burying them within her own flesh, imprisoning them in Tartarus, denying them the sky, the light, the chance to rise. Gaia groaned beneath the weight of her buried children, not just with physical pain, but with the outrage of a mother whose womb had been turned into a prison. Her cries echoed across the unformed world, and in her grief and fury she began to plot. She forged a weapon in secret, an adamantine sickle, jagged and cruel, and she approached her Titan sons with a proposition. She offered them a chance to strike down their father, to seize his place, to unmake the reign of Uranus. Yet of the 12, only one stepped forward. Cronus, youngest of the Titans but boldest, most cunning, most ambitious, accepted the blade and the burden. One night, when Uranus descended once again to blanket Gaia in his eternal embrace, Cronus rose from hiding. With a swift and merciless stroke, he castrated his father, and the sky shuddered with the sound of divine agony. Uranus's blood fell upon Gaia, soaking the earth, and from it sprang new terrors, the Furies, shrieking spirits of vengeance, the giants, massive and wild, and Aphrodite herself, born not from love, but from violence, rising from the foam where flesh met sea. Cronus stood triumphant, the sickle still wet in his hands, his father cast down, the heavens torn. He claimed his place as king of the cosmos, ruling beside his sister and queen, Rhea. He had ended his father's tyranny and inaugurated what would later be called the Golden Age, a time of peace and plenty. But peace bought with blood carries its own curse, and in the eyes of the world, Cronus was not savior, but usurper. He had wounded the sky and broken the sacred bond of parent and child. And though Uranus fell into silence, his final breath was not one of forgiveness, but of prophecy. With his dying voice, he promised that Cronus too would fall by the hand of his own offspring, that the cycle of betrayal would not end but deepen. And so the throne changed hands. The age turned, but the stain remained. The world had been born in violence, and its kings, whether of sky or stone, would always rule with one eye fixed behind them, watching the cradle. The throne of the universe, if such a thing could be said to exist in the haze of those earliest ages, now passed to Cronus, the Titan who had dared to raise his hand against the sky itself. The sickle that had severed Uranus's manhood and power was buried now, not in earth or stone, but in memory, its sharp edge dulled not by time, but by the silence of those who had watched and said nothing. Cronus, the youngest of the Titans, and the only one bold enough, or foolish enough, to challenge the authority of a father who had once wrapped the entire world in his oppressive embrace, now stood alone at the summit of creation, crowned not with gold, but with the dripping blood of his progenitor. The act had not made him greater than Uranus. It had made him the same. And in the deep shadows of Gaia's grief, where the Furies still shrieked and the Cyclopes remained buried, Cronus declared a new order. He promised his kin that the age of terror had ended, that the tyranny of Uranus would be remembered only as a caution to kings who loved power more than their own flesh and blood. But in truth, the young Titan king feared the same whispers that had driven his father mad, that a child of his own would rise one day to cast him down, just as he had done to his father, and that the cycle of blood and betrayal would stretch onward, an unbreakable curse passed from God to God like a poisoned crown. He took Rhea as his queen, not from love or affection, but because she was his equal in divine stature, a sister born of the same womb, tempered in the same agony. She was beautiful and formidable, her eyes full of the depthless calm that only those born from Gaia's own bones could possess, and for a time she believed in the peace he promised. Their union brought forth a new generation, the first of the Olympians, and in each child lay the spark of something different, something unshaped and radiant, something neither wholly Titan nor entirely other. But Cronus could not look upon these newborns without hearing the voice of Uranus hissing from the depths of Tartarus, promising vengeance through the very mouths of the infants that cried in the arms of his wife. Each time Rhea brought a child into the world, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Cronus came, cloaked not in celebration but in fear. He did not cradle them, did not bless them or name them. He swallowed them, whole, alive, without a sound. He pressed their small warm bodies to his lips and drew them into the eternal black of his stomach, turning his own blood into prisoners inside his flesh. He called it wisdom. He called it safety. But it was terror, ancient and choking, passed from father to son like a funeral shroud, and with each devouring, the chill of prophecy tightened around his heart. Rhea, bound by fate and marriage, bore this in silence at first. Her cries were swallowed along with her children, her rage buried beneath a queenly exterior that gave no hint of the storm gathering within. She watched as her brothers and sisters, the other Titans, stood idle, unwilling to challenge Cronus, each afraid that to speak out would be to invite the same fate that befell Uranus. Some whispered behind closed lips that perhaps Cronus had done what was necessary, that a king must be merciless to preserve his reign. Others, like Oceanus, withdrew from the intrigues of Olympus altogether, retreating to the farthest reaches of their domains, where the tremors of the past could not reach them. But Gaia saw, and she remembered, and the earth groaned once again, though this time not from the weight of her children's imprisonment, but from the slow growing wrath of a mother who had outlived too many kings. When Rhea became pregnant a fifth time, she turned not to her husband, not to her siblings, but to the earth herself. Gaia, who had once armed Cronus with the sickle that unmade Uranus, now offered her daughter-in-law the weapons of deceit and hope. When the time came to deliver, Rhea did not go to the halls of Cronus, but fled in secret to a cave nestled in the cliffs of Mount Dicte, on the rugged island of Crete, where the winds howled and the stones whispered, and no eyes of Titans could follow. There, in shadow and secrecy, she bore a son, her sixth child, whom she named Zeus, a name that would one day shake the pillars of the world. And when Cronus came to claim what he believed was his due, Rhea swaddled a stone in cloth, rough and silent, and held it out with steady hands. Cronus took it without question, without care, and swallowed it just as he had the others. And with that simple act of blind destruction, he condemned himself. Zeus was raised in silence, far from the eyes of the heavens. The nymphs and the goat Amalthea fed and guarded him, and the Curetes, warrior spirits with bronze armor and clashing shields, danced and shouted and pounded their blades so that the cries of the infant would never reach the ears of Cronus. As the boy grew, so too did the ancient rhythm of fate. The child who suckled on honey and goat's milk in a hidden cave would one day walk among gods and demand recompense for every brother and sister swallowed whole. Cronus, unaware, ruled on, his gut a prison, his throne a borrowed victory. The Titans worshipped him, mortals. Few and primitive spoke of him with awe, and Rhea, composed and quiet, held her tongue and waited for the day when her true son would return. For no king rules forever, not Uranus, not Cronus, not even the ones who believe they have silenced prophecy with a single swallow. And so the Golden Age endured, not as a time of peace, but as a dream built on the bones of infants and the silence of a queen. The skies were bright, and the earth was rich, but beneath every harvest lay a whisper of unease, a murmur in the soil, a tremor in the wind. Gaia watched. Rhea endured. Zeus grew. And Cronus, seated on a throne of swallowed futures, never once realized that he was already undone. Cronus sat upon his throne at the peak of the world, crowned not with laurels nor bound in glory, but enthroned by blood, by betrayal, and by the silence that followed a father's fall. He ruled from the high reaches of Olympus, and the earth beneath him was golden, or so it seemed to those who did not look too closely. The rivers ran clear, the seasons turned as they should, and the harvests were full. But there was a stillness beneath the beauty, a hush that clung to the roots of trees and the hearts of gods, a silence born of swallowed children and prophecies unspoken aloud. The Golden Age, so often remembered in song and legend as a time of plenty, was in truth an age of dread, where the king of all things lived in constant fear of the future, haunted by the same shadow that had brought down his father before him. The difference was only in the method. Where Uranus had cast his sons into the bowels of the world, Cronus consumed his. And if there is a difference between a prison of stone and one of flesh, it mattered little to those locked within. Every time Rhea bore him a child, Cronus came to her chamber, not with the joy of a father or the reverence of a king, but with the cold resolve of a man who believed that destiny could be devoured like meat. He did not marvel at their small faces or their first breaths. He did not name them, nor cradle them in his arms. He took them in silence and swallowed them whole. Hestia, the firstborn, goddess of the hearth, who never saw flame. Demeter, the nourisher, whose touch never once met the fields. Hera, proud and terrible, who would one day become queen herself, but now only slipped away down her father's throat like a dream. Each child vanished, absorbed into Cronus's body, not dead, not alive, simply silenced, kept suspended in a kind of divine stasis, as if the Titan thought that so long as they did not draw breath beneath the open sky, they could never grow, never rebel, never fulfill the prophecy that clawed at the back of his mind like a beast at a locked door. The Titan court whispered behind polished marble and sacred pillars, their voices hushed and uncertain. None dared name what they knew. Cronus ruled with a heavy hand and a paranoid heart. He gave orders with iron finality, and his word was law, but there was a madness in his eyes. Subtle, buried deep, but spreading like mold in the corner of a palace wall. Rhea, once radiant with divine promise, now wore sorrow like a shroud. Her belly grew round again, and each time she screamed in labor, it was not followed by lullaby or celebration, only the footsteps of her husband coming to claim what he believed was his right. She wept, but her tears changed nothing. She begged Gaia, but the earth offered no relief, not yet. She turned to her sisters, to her brothers, but they averted their eyes. He Titans, old and mighty as they were, had learned from Uranus's fall that defying the king could bring ruin to all. Better to remain still, better to wait, better to let Rhea bear the weight of destiny alone. It was a kingdom of stasis. The Titans ruled the cosmos, but the world did not change. No new gods were born into light. No new realms were given shape. No great works were forged. The world held its breath, and in that breathless silence, Cronus mistook stillness for safety. He believed he had won. He had broken fate with his own jaws, swallowed prophecy, and silenced the cries of rebellion before they could rise. But he was wrong, for the child he had not swallowed, the boy Rhea had hidden, the one suckled in secret by nymphs in a Cretan cave, was growing, and with each passing year, he became more than a secret. He became inevitable. But Cronus did not know this. He paced his high halls and drank sweet nectar from golden cups. And from his throne of bone and stone, he dreamed of eternity. He feared sleep. He feared the sound of crying babes. He feared every dream that ended with a hand on his throat or a blade in his back. He feared time itself, though he was time's personification. And most of all, he feared the thing he had once been, the son who rose in the shadow of a tyrant and dared to strike. He saw his own reflection in every pool and puddle, and behind that reflection, always, the vague outline of a figure yet to come. Rhea, meanwhile, said nothing more. Her face became stone, her eyes distant. She sat beside him in court and played the part of the loyal queen. But in her heart, she carried a secret like fire, a tiny ember wrapped in cloth and hidden in a cave. And every time Cronus passed by her, with his brow furrowed and his shoulders tense, she would smile ever so slightly, for she knew what he did not. The child lived, and he would not remain hidden forever. It began, as most wars do, not with fanfare or declaration, but with silence, breaking under the weight of truth. Zeus had grown tall in secret, his limbs strong with the strength of mountain stone and wild milk, his eyes sharp with the knowledge that he had been hidden, that his birthright had been devoured, that his mother had wept and lied and risked the wrath of a king so that he might live. He did not grow up with the softness of courtly love or the laziness of noble airs. He was raised by nymphs in the dark hollows of Crete, fed by wild honey and guarded by the constant din of clashing swords and stomping feet, as the curettes banged their shields and danced in warlike frenzy, masking his infant cries from the heavens above. He learned to listen before he spoke, to observe before he acted, to wait until the hour was right. And when it came, he did not hesitate. He climbed the heights of Olympus not as a supplicant, but as a son long denied. And he did not bring gifts or apologies. He brought vengeance. Cronus, never fully at peace, never truly asleep, never wholly unaware, did not recognize the young man before him as his own. Perhaps it was because he had forgotten the feel of his children's faces. Perhaps because prophecy always takes the shape we least expect. Or perhaps it was fear itself that blinded him, the fear that had driven him to swallow the future, only to find that fate, unlike flesh, cannot be digested. Zeus stood before him, and with a calm smile and a voice that did not tremble, offered his father a cup. It was laced with a concoction of divine bile and cunning, crafted not by chance, but with careful study, learned in the shadows from Gaia herself, and whispered by those who remembered what had come before. Cronus drank, as he always had, believing he consumed power, believing still that he could control what had never truly belonged to him. And then he staggered, and then he choked, and then he vomited. One by one the children swallowed, long ago emerged, not as infants, but as gods. Hestia, serene and watchful. Demeter, earthy and vengeful. Hera, regal and wrathful. Hades, dark and brooding. And Poseidon, wild as the seas that bore his name. They rose from the Titan's insides like ghosts released from a tomb, fully grown and full of the memory of darkness. They did not thank him. They did not weep. They stood beside Zeus, shoulder to shoulder, the 6 children of Cronus at last together, not as a family, but as an army. What followed was not a war in the way mortals wage them. It was not fought for land or pride, or even vengeance alone. It was a war of eras, of orders, of the old against the new, of a world that had grown weary against one that had not yet begun. The Titanomachy, as it would come to be known, raged for 10 years, though time then was still being invented, and the passing of days was measured more by the screams of mountains, and the boiling of seas than by sunrises or seasons. Zeus led the charge with thunder in his fists and a voice that shook the sky. Poseidon tore open the rivers and hurled tidal waves across enemy lines. Hades split the ground and drew forth the shadows that clung to the feet of the dying. And their father, Cronus, once the usurper and now the besieged, called upon his brothers and sisters, the ancient titans who still ruled the corners of the cosmos, to hold the line against the rising storm. At first, it seemed the old gods would prevail. The titans had age, strength, and dominion over all the natural forces. They wielded time and memory like swords, and their fury was not hot like the rage of youth, but cold and enduring, carved from eons of divine supremacy. But they lacked unity. They lacked vision. They had grown accustomed to power and could not imagine a world in which it might be taken. Cronus fought with desperation, not purpose, and the other titans followed not from love, but from obligation. Some, like wise Themis and clever Prometheus, saw the writing on the wall and abandoned the titan cause early, offering their wisdom and cunning to the rebel gods in hopes that they might shape the world to come. And then came the shift, the moment upon which all victory turned. At Gaia's urging, Zeus descended into the deepest chasm of the world and freed the Hecatonchires, the 100-handed giants buried by Uranus long ago, and their Cyclopean brothers, who had not seen light since the dawn of time. Forgotten by their kin, cursed and chained in Tartarus for crimes they had never committed, they rose now with a vengeance that shook the very teeth of the underworld. In gratitude and fury, the Cyclopes forged for Zeus his lightning, for Poseidon the trident that broke the sea, and for Hades the helm of shadow that made him a ghost upon the battlefield. The Hecatonchires, with 50 arms on each side, hurled mountains like pebbles and shattered the Titan phalanxes with a storm of stone and shrieking steel. The final battle was fought on the plains of Thessaly, though in those days it bore no name. The sky darkened until it was a vault of flame. Mountains crumbled and rivers fled their beds. The gods fought not with armies, but with the elements themselves. Lightning cracked the sky into shards. Oceans rose and fell in a single breath. Fire poured from the earth and was swallowed by wind. In the center of it all stood Zeus, cloaked in thunder, hurling bolts from his fists with the precision of a butcher. Cronus met him at last, not as a father greeting his son, but as a king staring down the storm he had tried to outrun. They clashed in the ruins of a world not yet made, and when it was over, Cronus fell, not slain, but broken, cast down, and chained in the darkness beneath all things. His brothers were bound beside him in Tartarus, behind gates wrought of adamantine, and watched over by monsters forged in battle. There would be no clemency, no mercy. The old gods were buried where no light could reach, and the world gasped in silence. Zeus and his siblings stood amidst the smoking wreckage of a cosmos torn open and resown. The war was won, but the cost had been immeasurable. The air itself seemed quieter now, as if it feared what the victors might do next. There was no cheering, no feast, only the long exhale of fate, a breath that had been held since the moment Gaia bore Uranus and the world began. And in that silence, the new gods began to divide the spoils. The heavens were given to Zeus, who had shattered the sky and claimed dominion over storm and justice. The sea was granted to Poseidon, who now walked the tides as a lord walks his keep. And the underworld, silent and vast, was entrusted to Hades, who had tasted darkness and found it fitting. The earth itself, and all who walked upon it, belonged to no one and everyone at once. The Titans were imprisoned, the Hecatonchires kept watch, the Cyclopes returned to their forges, and the 6 gods, the children of Cronus and Rhea, stood as the new rulers of existence, not by right, not by love, but by fire and war and the inescapable turning of time. Thus ended the reign of the Titans and began the rule of the Olympians. The world had not been remade, it had been claimed. And though the war was over, the story of the gods had only just begun. The war was over, but the wounds it carved had yet to scar. The heavens still smelled of lightning, the mountains still bore the claw marks of giants, and the seas had not yet remembered their quiet. When the ash settled and the screams fell silent, the victors looked upon the battered world not with triumph, but with the weight of inheritance. The Olympians had not inherited peace, they had inherited its ruins. The old order had been pulled down by force, not replaced by wisdom, and the gods who now sat upon the thrones of the sky, the sea, and the underworld had known nothing but struggle, rebellion, and blood. Zeus, the youngest of them, yet now the first among them, ascended not because he was beloved, nor because he was most just, but because he was the storm. He had brought down Cronus with thunder, had shattered the Titans with fire, had wielded force as deftly as a mason wields a chisel, and the world had yielded to him, not in affection, but in awe. Zeus claimed the heavens for his own, lifting his throne above the clouds, ringed in cold fire and crowned with stormlight. From there, he looked down upon all things, earth, sea, and the black depths below, and he named himself king. His voice became law, his glance became fate, and his anger became legend. Poseidon, though fierce and proud, took the sea without quarrel, for the ocean had always answered to no one, and only he among the gods could hear its shifting moods and fury. Hades, quieter still, turned his back on the sun and descended willingly into the underworld, not in shame or exile, but in grim acceptance of what was his to rule. The earth remained shared, though none of them trusted the balance. Olympus rose as their stronghold, carved of cloud and stone, unreachable by mortal hand, wrapped in the light of eternity, and there the gods began to shape the new order. But order, like power, is brittle when young, and cracks soon ran beneath its surface. Though his siblings stood beside him, and the Titans lay bound, Zeus could not forget the voice of his father, broken and fading, whispering of betrayal. He could not silence the echo of Uranus's last curse, or the prophecy that had gnawed through Cronus's belly and now crept like rot through the root of his own reign. The old wound reopened in a new shape, that one day Zeus too would fall, struck down not by a foe from without, but by blood of his own blood, a child greater than the father, born not yet, fated to rise. And Zeus, though mightier than Cronus, though louder than the sky and crueler than the sea, was still a son who had once held a poisoned cup and watched a king choke on his own legacy. He would not allow that history to repeat, not again. So when he took his first wife, Metis, the clever Titaness of wisdom, whose thoughts could twist like rivers, and whose mind rivaled the fates themselves, he did so not with love in his heart, but with a careful and guarded curiosity. She was no war bride, no spoil, no prisoner. She was an equal in thought, and Zeus admired her counsel. But when the oracles whispered that Metis would bear him a daughter of great wisdom, and then a son mightier than he, a child who would overthrow him and bring the Olympian age to its knees, he did not hesitate. Zeus opened his mouth and swallowed Metis whole, not out of malice, but out of fear. He consumed her in the same way Cronus had consumed him, the same way Uranus had buried his monstrous sons, believing, wrongly, that fate could be silenced if its voice was devoured before it could speak. Yet fate is not a songbird that can be caged, nor a whisper that can be eaten. Fate is a river that runs under all things, and the more one fights it, the more one drowns. From within his skull, Metis did not die. She whispered, she forged, she planned. And in time, as Zeus ruled and thundered and tried to forget what he had done, he was struck not with rebellion from without, but with pain from within, a cracking pressure behind his eyes that no god could soothe. The agony drove him mad, and it was only when Hephaestus, god of the forge, split his skull with an axe that the prophecy burst forth in full glory. Athena, born not of womb, but of mind, clad in armor, radiant with wisdom, sword already drawn. A child of war and thought, born fully grown, undaunted, unshaken. She did not rebel, she did not rage. She stood by his side and bowed her head, and for a time Zeus believed the curse broken. There was no son. He had taken the future and bent it to his will. But fate had not finished with him. From the depths of the earth, no, from deeper still, from beneath the bones of the world, from a place older than Titans, older even than Gaia's waking, came a sound. Not a roar, not a cry, not even a word. A windless howl, a pressure in the blood, a memory of terror that every god felt but none could name. For Cronus had been defeated, yes, and the Titans locked away. But Gaia, wounded by the war against her sons, had birthed a final vengeance. Something no god, no Titan, no mortal thing had ever beheld. Typhon, the last monster, the storm of all storms, the fire that eats thunder. He rose with serpent legs that wrapped the earth, with wings that blackened the sky, with 100 voices shrieking in tongues no living thing could speak. The Olympians fled at first, even the gods, even those who had broken mountains and boiled oceans, ran, their weapons slipping from fingers not used to fear. Only Zeus stood his ground. The battle between Zeus and Typhon did not take place in time. It shattered it. It tore the fabric of the world, boiled rivers to air, scorched forests into ash, knocked stars from the sky and hurled them into the sea. Typhon's breath was smoke and madness. His arms were lightning, his body a mountain of chaos. But Zeus, the thunderer, king of heaven, summoned every bolt he had ever known, every shard of fury he had ever buried, and hurled them in a storm that split the continents. It was not might that won the day, but wrath, pure, unrelenting, divine wrath. In the end, Zeus cast down Typhon, burying the beast beneath Mount Etna, where fire still spills from the ground, and the earth still groans under his weight. And in doing so, Zeus proved not just that he was king, but that he was the storm. Yet even as Olympus rose again, and the gods returned to their thrones, nothing was quite the same. The sky had held its breath, the earth had trembled, and Zeus, for all his power, for all his victories, could no longer pretend that the age of gods would pass in peace. He had swallowed a wife. He had fought a monster. He had bent prophecy and broken the world. And still, the future waited. Somewhere out there, unseen and unborn, the next betrayal already stirred. The sky had been tamed, the Titans were in chains, and the monsters of the deep had been buried beneath stone and ash. But for all his victories, Zeus could not escape the itch that power always brings. The quiet, gnawing knowledge that rule is never truly complete unless it commands the smallest things as surely as it commands the greatest. It was not enough for Zeus to be king of Olympus, not enough to wield lightning and silence monsters. He now turned his eye downward, toward the fragile, mortal creatures crawling along the earth's surface. Men and women who lived and died in cycles of pain and hunger, their bodies frail, their years short, their understanding as dim as starlight in fog. They were no threat, not in strength or ambition, not yet, but Zeus, who had seen how prophecies were born from even the weakest of things, believed the danger was not in what they were, but in what they might become, and so he began to limit them. He denied them the secrets of fire, that holy and dangerous spark stolen from the heart of heaven, the flame that warmed, forged, cooked, and killed. Fire was divine. It belonged to gods and smiths and stars. In the hands of mortals, Zeus feared it would become a ladder, and every ladder was a danger to a throne. He decreed that mankind would live in cold and darkness, feeding on raw flesh, crouching in caves, dying in winters that never forgave weakness. He watched them huddle like insects, and where others might have pitied, Zeus saw only precaution. He believed the world was now in balance, order above, struggle below, and he had no interest in changing that. But not all gods agreed. Prometheus, a titan by birth and exile by choice, had not fought for Cronus during the war. He had stood apart, watching both sides tear the world in half, calculating, listening, learning. He was not made of storm or sea or fire. He was made of foresight. And what he foresaw now was a species abandoned, not because it had failed, but because the gods feared it might someday succeed. Prometheus had walked among men in the early days, not as a ruler, but as a guide. He had shaped them from clay, molded their limbs with tenderness, taught them names, language, thought. He loved them, not as a god loves a worshipper, but as a craftsman loves his work, as a teacher loves a student who does not yet know what he could become. And when he saw them suffer, not from weakness, but from deliberate deprivation, he acted. One night, cloaked in smoke and secrecy, Prometheus ascended to Olympus. He passed the halls of the gods, quiet as the wind, and entered the forge of Hephaestus, where the sacred fire blazed behind golden grates. And there, without apology or fear, he stole it. A single ember, hidden in a fennel stalk, carried down from heaven to earth like the spark of rebellion itself. And when he brought it to mankind, when he placed the flame in their trembling hands and watched their eyes fill with light, he knew what he had done. He had defied a king. He had raised the low. He had shifted the balance of the world. The fire spread. The world changed. Where once there had been caves, now there were hearths. Where once there had been raw meat, now there were pots of boiling grain. Where once there had been silence, now there were stories, songs, bronze blades, and smouldering coals that burned not only wood, but ignorance. Mankind rose quickly, faster than the gods expected. They tamed animals, tilled soil, carved temples, and lit bonfires that rivaled stars. And Zeus, watching all this from his cold throne, was enraged, not by the theft, but by its success, for the flame had not killed them, it had awakened them. Zeus summoned Prometheus and offered him a chance to kneel, to explain, to show remorse for what he had done. Prometheus did not kneel. He spoke plainly, without fear, and told Zeus that the world belonged not only to the immortals, but to the mortals as well. That mankind, though small and mortal and brief, was capable of greatness beyond divine imagining, if only they were given the tools to reach it. Zeus listened. And when Prometheus finished, Zeus said nothing. He merely nodded to his guards, and they took the Titan away. They dragged him to the edge of the world, to a mountain so high the clouds bled against its peak, and there they chained him, naked and alone, to a stone that felt no pity. With adamantine links they bound his limbs, and for his crime of compassion they sentenced him not to death, but to endless punishment. Each morning a great eagle would descend, talons black as judgment, and tear into his belly to devour his liver. And each night, as the sun dipped beneath the curve of the sky, the organ would grow back, full and raw, ready to be eaten again. There was no rest, no release, only pain and the slow erosion of time. And through it all, Prometheus never screamed. He did not beg. He endured. For he had given humanity fire, and he knew, in his blood and bones, that they would not forget. But Zeus was not finished. Prometheus had been punished, but the mortals still burned their fires and sang their songs. And so the king of the gods decided to strike not with thunder, but with gifts. He would destroy them not with flood or plague, but with beauty. He summoned Hephaestus, the divine smith, and ordered him to mold a woman from earth and grace. Every god added something to her. Aphrodite gave her charm, Hermes gave her cunning, Athena gave her skill, Apollo gave her music. She was radiant, dazzling, clever beyond measure. She was named Pandora, meaning all gifted, and she was sent not as a bride, not as a blessing, but as a weapon. She carried with her a jar, some say a box, that she was told never to open. She was given to Prometheus, Prometheus's duller brother, who, in his loneliness and longing, accepted her without question. He ignored his brother's warnings, forgot his caution, and fell in love with the thing crafted to destroy him. And so, Pandora lived among men, smiled, sang, and watched. But curiosity, too, had been placed inside her, whether as a flaw or a feature, none could say. One day, unable to resist the whisper of the sealed jar, she opened it, and from it poured every sorrow the world has ever known. Disease, which rots the body, grief, which darkens the soul, jealousy, which poisons love, famine, madness, war, old age, death, all of them surged out in a black storm, filling the corners of the earth and coiling around every heart. Men who had sung now wept. Women who had danced now buried their children. The world, once full of fire and promise, became a place of suffering. The gods looked on, some with triumph, others with pity, and Zeus watched with cold satisfaction as humanity bent under the weight of what it had been given. But not everything had escaped. At the bottom of the jar, unnoticed in the chaos, one thing remained. When Pandora peered inside, trembling, she found it, small and flickering, like a flame nearly smothered, fragile as a breath in winter. Hope. She let it out. It rose into the sky, weak but defiant, and drifted among the ashes. It could not undo what had been done. It could not close the wounds. But it stayed. And wherever sorrow took root, hope grew beside it, stubborn and quiet and everlasting. And so the age changed. Mortals had fire, but they also had pain. They had thought, but they also had grief. They walked upright, with open eyes, but they wept as they walked. The gods, high on Olympus, had ensured that mankind would never rise too far, too fast, but they had also ensured that mankind would never again bow in simple, silent fear. The world had become a harder place, but it had also become a world worth fighting for. The age that followed was neither golden nor pure. It was not carved in the shining marble of Olympus, nor lost in the black rot of Tartarus, but forged somewhere in between, in the smoke-choked valleys and sunlit hills of the mortal world, where men tilled soil and feared the night, where gods wandered in secret, cloaked in mortal skin, their hearts restless, their appetites boundless. The world, though ruled from the high halls of Olympus, was no longer shaped solely by immortal hands. The gods had tasted war, had felt the cut of betrayal, and had seen the embers of fire catch in the hearts of men. They descended more often now, not out of duty or justice, but out of boredom, out of desire, out of sheer divine arrogance. And when gods walked among mortals, mortals trembled, or burned, or changed forever. They left behind not just ruin or blessing, but blood, divine blood, and with it, the world changed again. These children, born of sky and soil, of thunder and bone, were neither fully mortal nor fully divine. They did not sit on thrones in Olympus, but neither did they die like other men. They were heroes, though the word in those days meant something harder, rougher, more terrible. A hero was not a savior. A hero was a force, a storm given a name. These children, born of sky and soil, of thunder and bone, were neither fully mortal nor fully divine. They did not sit on thrones in Olympus, but neither did they die like other men. They were heroes, though the word in those days meant something harder, rougher, more terrible. A hero was not a savior. A hero was a force, a storm given a name. They were born in strange places, raised in exile or secrecy or sorrow, and sent into the world like blades drawn from sheaths that the gods themselves had forged. They did not seek peace. They sought purpose. And the world, already broken by wars of gods and burned by divine vengeance, had no shortage of monsters for them to kill, nor kings for them to challenge, nor prophecies for them to fulfill. Perseus was the first among them, or at least the first whose tale echoed loud enough to survive the ages. He was born of Danae, a mortal princess imprisoned in a bronze chamber beneath the earth, locked away by her father, King Acrisius, who had been told by an oracle that his daughter's son would be his doom. And yet, even locked in darkness, Danae could not escape fate, for Zeus himself came to her, not in human form but in a shower of golden light, slipping through the cracks of her prison and leaving her with child. When Acrisius discovered the infant, he did not hesitate. He placed mother and son into a wooden chest and cast them into the sea, thinking perhaps the ocean could do what he would not, kill for him. But the sea, for once, showed mercy. The chest floated ashore on the island of Seriphos, and Perseus lived. He grew not in palaces, but in the rough courts of fishermen and bronze-bearded kings, with the scent of salt in his lungs and the weight of prophecy on his back. The gods watched him with distant interest. Athena whispered to him in dreams. Hermes watched his steps with the wariness of an older brother wary of a rival. And when Perseus was tricked by a tyrant king into promising an impossible gift, the head of Medusa, the Gorgon whose gaze turned men to stone, it was not pity that moved the gods to aid him, but curiosity. They gave him winged sandals, a mirror-like shield, a sword that could cut through anything, and a helm that cloaked him in invisibility. He set out not as a man, but as a myth in the making, alone and armed with borrowed power. The path to Medusa was not paved in triumph. He passed through lands that stank of rot, crossed rivers that whispered secrets in tongues he did not know, and entered realms where time bent sideways and sleep brought visions of blood. When at last he found her, the cursed maiden, once a priestess of Athena, turned into a monster for the sin of being raped in the goddess's own temple, she did not roar or chase him. She slept. Her sisters hissed in the dark, and her serpents curled around her brow like a crown of regret. and Perseus, full of purpose and fear and youthful righteousness, raised his blade and struck her down. The blood sprayed in arcs that carved new rivers. Her head, still alive, still deadly, was tucked into a sack. Her eyes never closed. From her death came Pegasus, the winged horse who sprang from her severed neck, and Chrysaea, a giant born fully armed. From her death came legend. Perseus did not return home immediately. He wandered, as heroes do. He found Andromeda chained to a rock, a sacrifice to a sea monster sent by Poseidon, who had been insulted by her vain mother. Perseus slew the beast, claimed the girl, and with her a kingdom. He returned to Seriphos to find the king who had wronged him threatening his mother, and with a flourish he turned the tyrant to stone with Medusa's head. His victories piled high, like bones before a throne. But fate, as ever, was not yet finished. In time, Perseus returned to Argos, to the court of his grandfather. He did not come with an army, he did not come with vengeance, but Acrisius, still afraid, fled. He travelled to Larissa, seeking peace or delay, and it was there during athletic games that Perseus, full of youth and pride, threw a discus that veered off course. It struck an old man in the crowd, shattered his skull, and killed him. The old man was Acrisius. The prophecy had come true. The doom had been delayed, diverted, disguised, but never avoided. And thus was the tale of Perseus written, not as a story of justice, nor as one of revenge, but as a thread in the larger tapestry of myth, a tale that burned brightly and ended quietly, with the weight of fate resting heavy on the shoulders of a man who had slain monsters, rescued maidens, and crowned kingdoms, but could not escape the curse that came before he was born. He became a king, yes, and a founder of cities. His children spread across the Greek world, but he lived always with the knowledge that his greatest act had not been one of choice, but of accident, that even the chosen of the gods were still pieces on a board too vast to see. The world was changing. The line between gods and mortals had begun to blur, and Perseus, the first of the great heroes, walked that line with the dignity of a man who understood that glory was only ever borrowed, and that all stories, no matter how grand, ended in the same dark silence. In the wake of Perseus, the world remembered the shape of greatness. His name passed from mouth to mouth, sung beneath flickering hearths and whispered in the stillness before battle. And though no two tellings ever agreed, they all shared the same undercurrent, that a man born of God and woman could rise to slay horrors and shape kingdoms. The line between mortals and immortals had been breached, and from that tear in the veil spilled stories of others, born not just of prophecy, but of ambition, rage, and the ceaseless hunger of men who would not live and die in silence. In the generations that followed, heroes emerged like sparks from a flint stone, and among them was Theseus, son of Aegeus, prince of Athens, and perhaps of Poseidon, depending on which bard told the tale. He was not born with greatness, nor marked by divine visions, but he was clever and cunning, and cruel when the world required it, and in the age of heroes, that was often all the world required. His youth was a quiet one, spent in Troezen with his mother Aethra, away from the noise and burden of court. But the blood in his veins would not let him remain forgotten. When he came of age and learned the truth of his parentage, that he was a prince, that a sword and sandals had been left beneath a boulder by his father as both a test and a legacy, he did not hesitate. He lifted the stone, took what was his, and walked to Athens, not by sea as a prince might, but overland, through a wild and violent countryside littered with bandits, monsters, and would-be kings. And in that long and brutal journey, he forged himself. He crushed Periphetes the club-bearer, bent Sinis the pine-bender to death by his own trees, cast Siren to the man-eating turtles he had once fed. He met cruelty with cleverness and evil with equal malice, and each foe that fell before him left behind another tale, another name, another warning carved into the stone of the world. Theseus passed here. He arrived in Athens not as a boy claiming birthright, but as a conqueror. Yet no throne was freely given in that city. Aegeus, though king, was ensnared by sorcery and paranoia, married to the witch Medea, who saw in Theseus a threat to her power and tried, as all who fear the future do, to poison it before it could grow. But Theseus revealed his lineage in time, and Medea, unmasked, fled in fury. Athens accepted him then, not out of love, but out of awe. And it was then that Theseus learned of the tribute to Crete, the shame of Athens, the price of a lost war. Every 9 years, the city sent 7 young men and 7 maidens to King Minos, not for marriage or service, but for death. The youths were cast into the labyrinth, an endless maze beneath Knossos, where they were hunted and devoured by the Minotaur, a beast of muscle and horn, born from a queen's lust and a god's curse, kept as both punishment and pride. Theseus did not wait to be chosen. He volunteered. He sailed to Crete with the doomed, not weeping, but watchful. There he met Ariadne, daughter of Minos, who fell not in love with Theseus's face or name, but with the fire behind his words, the promise of defiance. She gave him a ball of thread, simple and sacred, a lifeline through the dark. And so he entered the labyrinth, not knowing if he would return. Inside, the air was thick with the stench of blood and damp stone, and the walls whispered the screams of those who had never found their way out. At the heart of it waited the Minotaur, a creature neither man nor beast, once a child, now a prisoner and executioner. They fought not with words or strategy, but with desperation. The battle was short and savage. Theseus killed the beast, not as a hero slaying a monster, but as a man murdering a memory, slashing it open with steel, watching its body twitch and fall in the silence of its own tomb. He escaped by Ariadne's thread, leading the children out of the maze, back to the sun, and boarded his ship as a savior. But the sea has a memory, and the gods are slow to forget. On the journey home, Theseus abandoned Ariadne, leaving her on the island of Naxos. Whether by divine compulsion or mortal coldness, none can say. She awoke alone, betrayed by the man she had saved, her thread unraveling in the salt wind. Dionysus would find her and raise her to the stars, but Theseus would carry the guilt for the rest of his days. His ship neared Athens, but he forgot, or chose not, to change his sails from black to white, the agreed-upon signal of his survival. His father, Aegeus, watching from the cliffs, saw the black sails and believed his son dead. In his grief, he leapt into the sea, which bears his name still. Theseus returned to a throne bathed in tears and crowned not by joy, but by mistake. He became king, yes, and a unifier of Attica, yes. But greatness is not goodness, and Theseus, though clever and brave, was not kind. He kidnapped Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons, and bore a child by her. He later married Phaedra, Ariadne's sister, and when their lives unraveled in blood and lust and lies, it was his son Hippolytus who paid the price. Theseus's rule was long, but his victories were shadowed by betrayal, his legacy poisoned by the same ambition and carelessness that had once made him strong. He died far from Athens, exiled and forgotten, pushed from a cliff by a king he had once called a friend. No monument marked the spot. No thunder shook the skies. The monster slayers of that age, Perseus, Theseus, Bellerophon, Cadmus, each walked the same road, born of God and woman, tasked with impossible deeds, rising higher than mortal men could dream, only to fall further. Their stories do not end with peace or comfort. They end in silence, or madness, or exile. For the world they lived in did not forgive greatness. It used it, then cast it aside. And yet their names endured. Not because they were kind, not because they were just, but because they were necessary. In an age still haunted by the gods, still stalked by the beasts of an older world, these were the men who carved paths with blade and blood and fire. They were not the best of men, but they were the strongest. And for a time, that was enough. Before the war at Troy, before Achilles dragged a corpse behind his chariot, before Odysseus wandered the seas and kings butchered their daughters to please the wind, there was Heracles, the strongest of men, the most tormented of heroes, and the only mortal to claw his way into Olympus, not through prayer or favor or birthright, but through suffering so vast and strength so godlike that the gods themselves, in the end, had no choice but to name him their equal. He was not wise like Odysseus, nor proud like Agamemnon, nor cunning like Theseus, and his heart was not tender, nor was it cruel. He was what the world had made him, a weapon too mighty for peace and too noble for oblivion. The world did not offer him love, it gave him struggle, and he, in return, gave it legend. He was born in Thebes, the son of Alcmene, a mortal queen, and Zeus, who once again descended to earth not as thunder or fire, but in deceit, taking the form of Alcmene's husband, sleeping in her bed, planting a child that would carry heaven in his blood and sorrow in his fate. Hera, queen of gods and queen of vengeance, discovered the affair, as she always did, and her fury was not spent on Zeus, who would never stop, but on the child who had never asked to be born. From the moment Heracles drew breath, Hera set her hatred upon him. She delayed his birth so that another child, Eurystheus, weak, petty, and royal, would claim the throne destined for him. She sent serpents into his cradle, hoping to silence the boy before he could learn to cry. But Heracles, still an infant, rose from sleep, seized the snakes in his fists, and crushed them like dry twigs. Even then, the world knew what he was. He grew vast and wild, his body swelling with strength that could split trees and kill lions before he reached manhood. He trained in every art, fought with spear and bow, and learned music and philosophy, though these sat awkwardly in his hands, like jewelry on a butcher. He was married young to Megara, a noble wife who bore him children and gave him something like peace. But peace was not in Hera's design. She clouded his mind with madness so deep and consuming that he no longer saw what was real. He heard war where there was laughter. He saw enemies where there were sons. And in a night of screams and firelight, Heracles slaughtered his own wife and children, carving his name into history with the blood of those he had loved most. When the madness lifted, there was no defense, no excuse, only silence and ruin, and a man who had been broken not by sword or enemy, but by the gods themselves. He could have died then. He should have died. But the fates were not finished. The oracle at Delphi told him there was a path to atonement, not peace, not forgetfulness, but something close to redemption. He was to serve Eurystheus, the petty king who had taken his throne, and obey every command given, no matter how demeaning, no matter how deadly. And so began the 12 labors, tasks crafted not to cleanse, but to kill, to break his spirit, snap his bones, and remind him that even the strongest man in the world was still a pawn in the hands of kings and gods. The first task was the Nemean lion, a beast with hide so thick no blade could pierce it, a predator that had terrorized the valleys and forests until no hunter dared approach. Heracles cornered it in its lair, cast aside his weapons, and choked it to death with his bare hands, ripping the air from its lungs as it thrashed and bit and clawed. He skinned it with its own claws and wore the pelt as armor, the head as a hood, a living monument to brutality endured and delivered. Then came the Lenaean Hydra, a serpent of 9 heads, each one sprouting 2 more when severed, a venomous abomination born from the muck of the swamps and the nightmares of men. Heracles fought it with fire and sword, cauterizing each neck as he cut, until no heads remained to hiss or regrow. He dipped his arrows in its blood, poison so deadly it would blacken even divine flesh, because a hero without weapons is only a victim with good intentions. He cleaned the Augean stables, home to thousands of cattle left to rot and wallow in filth for decades, not with shovel or patience, but by tearing rivers from their course and forcing them to flood the muck in a single day. He hunted the Ceryneian hind, sacred to Artemis, faster than any wind, and caught it not with violence but with endurance, chasing it for a year through mountains and frost until it collapsed, exhausted, in his arms. He brought down the Erymanthian boar, a mountain-dwelling terror with tusks like plows, by driving it into snowdrifts too deep to flee. He killed the man-eating birds of Stymphalus with the storm of arrows and noise. He tamed the Cretan bull, subdued the mares of Diomedes that fed on human flesh, wrestled the Amazon Queen Hippolyta for her girdle, and left chaos in his wake. He stole the cattle of Geryon, a 3-bodied giant, and killed him in a sunless land with a poisoned arrow through the ribs. Each labor grew heavier, darker. Each triumph cost more than the one before. The 11th labor sent him to the far west, where the earth ended and the sky began, to steal the golden apples from the garden of the Hesperides, guarded by nymphs and a dragon that never slept. Heracles did not fight the beast. He found Atlas, the Titan cursed to hold up the sky, and tricked him into retrieving the apples by offering to bear his burden. When Atlas returned, intending to leave Heracles in his place, the hero smiled, asked for a moment to adjust his cloak, and when the sky was passed back to his shoulders, he took the apples and left. Strength was useful, but wit could win where fists could not. The final labor was the darkest. He was ordered to descend into Hades, to the land of the dead, and return with Cerberus, the 3-headed hound who guarded the gates of the underworld. No mortal had entered and returned before. But Heracles, who had already borne madness and murder and the hatred of heaven, did not falter. He descended through the black, past the ghosts of those he had killed, past the shades of unburied men who begged for memory. He found Hades, the god of the dead, and asked, not demanded, not stole, for the beast. And Hades, perhaps moved by respect or curiosity or the weariness of one who sees the end of all things, allowed it, so long as Heracles took Cerberus by strength alone. And so he wrestled the beast in its own darkness, took the jaws and the paws and the fury and mastered it, not through violence, but by will. He led it into the light, and with that, the labors ended. But Heracles' suffering did not. He returned to the world a legend, but legends once forged are never free. He wandered after, restlessly, dragging behind him the weight of his own name. He fought wars, built cities, took wives, fathered children. But nothing healed him, not the glories, not the applause, not the love of people who only saw the lion's skin and the poisoned arrows, and not the broken man beneath. Hera still hated him. The gods still used him, and the fates still spun. He had done the impossible 12 times over, and still the world demanded more. He should have been allowed to rest. He had earned it 100 times over, by bleeding for kings who feared him, by serving gods who tormented him, by enduring 12 labors that would have killed any other man a dozen different ways. But Heracles was not like other men. He had walked into the underworld and walked out again. He had strangled lions and split mountains and held the sky on his shoulders, while gods plotted and mortals cowered. And still, for all his strength and all his scars, peace slipped through his hands like dust. He had not been born for peace. He had been born for suffering. And the world, knowing this, never stopped asking more of him. He wandered after his labors were done, not with purpose but with inertia, the way a boulder continues to roll long after the hill is gone, too heavy to stop, too dangerous to leave where it lands. He moved through kingdoms like a storm, offering aid where it was asked, fighting monsters that dared to rise, challenging kings who ruled unjustly, bedding women who welcomed him, and offending those who feared the size of his shadow. He married again, not for politics, not for legacy, but because he wanted something that resembled a life. Her name was Deianira, and for a time she softened the edges of his anger, soothed the hollowness left behind by the labors. They traveled together.
Dear friends, if this story brought you even a little peace tonight, just imagine how many more relaxing bedtime stories are waiting for you on this channel. So, please like this video, share it with someone who also loves calm stories, and don't forget to subscribe to join our family. Make sure to turn on the notification bell so you'll be the first to know whenever a new story is uploaded. And now, YouTube has introduced something new. It's called hype. By giving our channel a little hype, you can help us reach so many more people who need rest and relaxation. Your support truly means the world. Finally, let us know in the comments how tonight's story felt for you. Every single word of feedback inspires us to create more magical bedtime journeys. Sweet dreams, and see you again in the next story.